plugin of the week is the Eiosis E² deesser. And this plugin is an amazing update of the deesser by Eiosis. It's really, in many ways, a complex and very in-depth and powerful plugin, unlike anything I've ever seen in terms of deessing. And it's also can actually be quite simple. So I want to go over the basic interface. In the top left, you got undos, you got got presets, so you can load in and store presets, all of that. You have an A/B for quick comparison. You have a spectrogram display here. You got your main settings here. You have an equalization circuit that both applies equalization to the original audio signal as well as the processing for the sibilance itself. So we'll get into some of that and how that works. You have some settings here for the spectrogram. The transport sync allows this display to move in kind of real time. You could set a sort of width around which it loops or length around which it loops. You have a settings here. This is a look ahead, so it's a pretty sophisticated device, and you could set the look ahead to be a higher degree of accuracy. So this gives it plenty of time to really capture everything as you're working with it. And then you have just default settings and all that sort of stuff that's in there. Essentially, most of the control work is done over here on the simple level. So if you work in this main detection section, you got a sensitivity and amount control. You start off with a mode. So if you could work with solo vocals or back vocals or background vocals, voiceover, which is a bit more aggressive, guitar squeaks, which focus more on when the fingers are sliding on a guitar. It happens a lot on round wound strings, especially on acoustic guitars. And then on overheads, so if you have cymbals or harshness and cymbals, it's really good for working with that. Stereo mastering, which is quite cool. MS mastering, which it allows you to apply different settings to the mid and side. And mid mastering, so sometimes you get something with a sibilant vocal and you only need to process the center signal in a stereo field, in which case you could work just on the mid processing. So it gives you some great starting places. There are differences between them. So in other words, if you're working with backgrounds, mixed backgrounds, you would go to the back vocals. If you have a solo vocal, even if it's with effects, work with the solo vocal kind of built in and kind of start there. Voiceovers are much drier and you can be much more aggressive with that. But we're going to start off with a solo vocal setting. Essentially, when you start with this, you have a bypass. This takes everything out of the circuit. You have a sensitivity control, and this basically determines, it's sort of like the closest thing to a threshold. Now, what's unique about this is a much more intelligent type of processor, so you won't see a threshold on it, you'll see a sensitivity. So in other words, it's kind of analyzing what's going on. Many processors, in terms of historically the way that deessing has been done, is you have a threshold. Basically what you have is a compression circuit that's triggered by the S's. In the old days, we used to just split off the vocal into an EQ, filter out everything, exaggerate the S's, and feed that into the side chain of the fastest compressor you had available. And then it would trigger that, but it would trigger across the full band. Later on, it got split off into working into a crossover that did just high frequencies. And then it got more sophisticated with bell curves, and this kind of takes it to a whole other level, so we'll kind of get into this. But the sensitivity control is not necessarily subject to those same threshold type of things. It will work in conjunction and kind of follow along with the way the vocal is working if the vocal level goes up and down. So that's really a difference there. The amount just basically determines how much de-essing is applied. So you can be very aggressive with more amounts, or you can be less with smaller amounts. Pretty straightforward. And if you started with just that, you would get basically just some very good results, okay, just from there. Now, when we get down here, we can get into a little bit more of a detailed approach to it. So when we're working with the sibilants here, the auto setting, the more or higher you have it, the more removal of steep frequency peaks and things like that you'll get. So you can, if you have really aggressive things that really pop out, this will help to kind of cut that down a little bit. And then there's also a harmonic distortion feature here called smoothing, a saturation circuit that helps to tone down that harshness and smooth out some of the high frequencies. Sometimes there may just be a natural characteristic. This happens quite often with condenser mics that don't have tubes or transformers attached to them. Something else that helps to balance out the high frequencies or kind of warm it up. On this end, you have a wet-dry control, which is also very cool because you can also work from the perspective of being very aggressive with the de-essing and then back off on the wet-dry, so you can kind of set your balance between the two of how de-essed it is, and do a balance that way. And then, of course, you have an output gain because you also have an equalization circuit built in. So, and that brings us over to the main display here where all the craziness happens. So what you have is, the way that the circuit essentially works is that as the vocal is passing through, you have what is called a voiced signal, right? And so if we monitor just the voiced signal, right? So if I go over here and I go this will give me everything except for the S's. And so if I was listening to that, I would be hearing everything except for the S's. If I listen to the sibilants, I could hear just the sibilants, so I could see what it is, and that way I could tell if it's giving me something or taking away something that I want to keep, and I can readjust my settings. And then there's a sibilance focus, which allows you to kind of focus in and find that particular frequency. Now, all of this works in conjunction with the display that you see here, the spectrogram. And on the spectrogram, you see here a frequency from 200 up to, I assume, about 20K. It shows you here up to 10K. And you can see here this bar right here, which is showing from a previous playback, is showing a display. This is where a sibilant occurs. And now you could see with the different colors how aggressive or where it's occurring. So in the lighter areas, this is showing you a little bit more of where the frequency area is that seems to be most affected. So this is unaffected signal. Will be a sibilant removed signal as you start to work with it. So what you have here is a display that shows in blue the voiced EQ. So what this allows you to do is you can put in an EQ onto the vocal, right? So you have multiple bands, so I can create additional bands just by moving my cursor over to the area and clicking, and then I would add a band that would give me a boost or an attenuation if I went lower. Now, so that's the blue band here, and then this is an equalization circuit for the affected signal or the sibilance itself. So you have two separate controls. So what happens is that when a sibilant occurs, it actually switches to the sibilant EQ with the dynamic control and then flips back. And so it's kind of like very much like a dynamic EQ that occurs during the sibilant time. So the circuit is seamlessly switching back and forth when those sibilants occur, and then it's graphically displayed up here. Okay, so if none of that makes sense, then let's focus in a little bit on it and adjust some settings. And let's just go with the stock settings right here, and then we'll kind of start to take some things in, see what we have.
Who we are, don't have a manual, but together we can use style.
Right, so you could hear
we are standing just feet apart, not recognizing the reflection of a superstar. When your legs start to give up on you, still run the race.
So this is what you're looking for here, is for the settings, so you could see the display kind of lighting up as it goes around here, and you want to set your sensitivity so it's primarily just focused on the S's. If you weren't sure about that, you could go to the sibilance listen, and then you could hear when it's grabbing onto the signal. All right, so it's a little bit jumpy. Okay, so, and then I can also focus in on, so this is showing the, so we could listen to the particular frequency and focus in on that. I'll get to that in a second. And then we could determine the amount, right? So we could...
It's enlightening who we are. Don't have a manual, but together we can use style. We are standing,
so you could see,
just feet apart.
So it applies that EQ.
Not recognizing the reflection of a superstar. When your legs start to give up on you, still run the race.
Right, so you could see here what's going on in this. So you could see this actual dynamic based on this particular shape. Now, if I wanted to do something that was more of a shelf, then I could bring this in. I could also shift this frequency here, and now
it's enlightening.
It'll change the shape of what I'm doing. So what I did is I right-clicked. So if you right-click or control-click on that, if you're on Mac or Windows, click on a PC. I'm not sure if that works. but right click, however you get there, will get you there. And so you could either go to a low pass filter shape, a shelving, or a bell curve. And this will determine the amount.
It's enlightening who we are. Don't have a manual, but together we can use style.
All right, so here we're picking up some other things in here. Sometimes you will also pick up C's and T's, which a lot of times is okay if they cut through a bit too much. But we can by changing this and changing the shape, we can kind of work with it a little bit better. Now there's also an EQ which is added in here. Okay, so I could take that off, and this would give me the original signal only de-essing.
It's enlightening who we are. Don't have a manual, but together we can use style. We are standing just feet apart, not recognizing the reflection of a superstar.
Okay, and so we could work with it along these ways, or we could put the equalization in it. And so what this does is this is going to add, and then I can kind of shift this. And also, if I right click into this, I can actually also change this. Right now, this is set to an air curve. I could also set to a shelf or a bell curve, and then kind of work within that. So if let's just say that I wanted to create another band. So if I click on this here, right, so now I have another equalization in here. So if I had a problem in another area, or I wanted to say, bring in like some kind of warmth or some kind of mid-range body, I could also do a dip. Like, so maybe there's a mid-range.
It's enlightening who we are. Don't have a manual, but together we can use style. We are standing just feet apart.
And you could see here what's going on is that it's pushing up from this. So where it's working from this regular EQ, it's going down to that. So in a way, when the sibilance is occurring, it's going back up to normal frequency. So this just allows me to kind of work within this. But I could also find other ranges here. If there was more than one area, I could set 2 bells and then work with those independently. So now as I drag this, I would have this dipping or boosting even if I wanted.
It's enlightening who we are. Don't have a manual, but together we can use style.
Right, so you can see how the EQ shifts there as you're going from the dry signal, unaffected signal, which is the blue equalization curve, to the red equalization curve. So if I wanted to, for example, I could actually set this as an overall boost, but now go, let's see here if I can now take this down, focus this on the particular frequency area where I want to dip, but have the overall kind of bring up a little bit of air, and now I would have something that's kind of doing a little bit of both.
It's enlightening who we are. Don't have a manual, but together we can use style. We are standing just feet apart, not recognizing the reflection of a superstar.
So if you find, for example, that in the process of working with the sibilant energy, that when you apply a filter circuit, it does still cut down on that, you could have something that's boosting around the area where the sibilance occurs to help to kind of bring a little bit more of the air kind of back in.
It's enlightening who we are. Don't have a manual, but together we can use style. We are standing just feet apart.
And if I wanted to focus this in, like if I'm
looking
at this, you could see here in this red circuit, if you look at the top red line that appears right here, I can actually see where this area focuses. So as I drag this frequency up, I can actually go into this area right here where you see a little bit more of that high frequency content, right? So I could kind of focus in there where that brightens up. That gives me a little bit of a better idea of where that is. This looks like an EQ that was kind of over aggressively added in there and then just cuts through with the S's.
It's enlightening who we are. Don't have a manual, but together we can use style. We are standing just feet apart, not recognizing the reflection of a superstar. When your legs start to give up on you, still run the race.
And so you can kind of get something that sounds very natural.
It's enlightening who we are. Don't have a manual, but together we can use style.
Right. So, and with this type of stuff, of course, obviously you can, work with this and bypass the particular EQ or remove the band, etc. I could reset the voice EQ, etc., etc., etc. So if I wanted to do this and I didn't like anything, it's easier for me to go in, recreate, move, etc., and change. And you could have 4 bands that you can work with that allow you to kind of work with the voice EQ, set in signal, right? The without sibilant and the way that the sibilant area sounds, and this gives you like an incredible amount of options in terms of the way that you actually work with all of the automation of the sibilance removal and how it ends up coming across in the actual signal. And the spectrogram offers a pretty amazing display. So it's a very, very powerful unit. I haven't played a whole lot with this in mastering work, although it's something that's very interesting that when I get the right project and I find something that's a really, really good example, I'll demonstrate that as well for a video for this because I think this is something with this much richness in detail, especially in something with a vocal, it can be very complex. But in the context of a mastering, those are always the most difficult places to do de-essing jobs. And just the fact that it's designed and set up with specific variations that allow for everything from guitar squeaks and overheads and stuff like that. There's a lot of options here that make this a very powerful tool. So really powerful one, really amazing one. They don't come out with a lot of plugins, but when Eiosis comes out with a plugin, it really kicks ass. And this is really an amazingly powerful tool. So this is the Eiosis E squared deesser, and this is the plugin of the week.